Now there's some things that we have to go super detailed. Tom has like a rounded out history of stuff we didn't cover in the book.
So,
So he'll do that, and then we'll just do like I've got some questions for us, or if that takes us to time, we can see.
um, Catherine, are you going to talk more about the history of Dale Doyle himself a little? Can you?
I mean, a little bit I could.
Yeah, that's just what you had in the blood. Yeah, and so I kind of pick up in 1947 or 1940, whichever, and then with the Hamburg. So if that would work, if you could do, that sounds good.
Pulled the highlights from the. Well, when I did
And I,
I'll also run a similar like very accurate Excel Hello. How are you? Welcome to, I almost said Castle Test Kitchen because that's on my mind. Welcome to Lunch and Learn. I'm Jennifer Vanette. I'm the outreach coordinator here, so it's my job to get to host all of these things, which is lovely. But today I'm going to help tell this story with my colleagues, Catherine Ellison and Tom Trombley. We'll get to that in just a moment. I do want to draw your attention. There are some refreshments at the back, and you should feel welcome to help yourself to that at any point. If you need a restroom at any point during the presentation, there's one just outside that back door, and that would be the preferable way to leave the room if you need to at any point. But if you want to come up here and join the panel, be my guest. It's all are welcome today. Drawing your attention to a few upcoming events that you might like to attend as well. On Thursday, August 15th at 5:30, we have our next History After Hours. We'll have Martinis and Marks, Cold War Espionage, again with Dr. Catherine Ellison. Yeah, be pretty fun. And then our next Lunch and Learn is Tuesday, August 27th at noon, as always. And we will have Alex Mixter here talking all things historic preservation. So that should be great as well. So I think without further ado, we don't really need to fully introduce ourselves any more than that, I don't think. So we will get going. Is it okay if we sit? Because it's going to be kind of, okay, are we good? Okay, cool. I have to now pass the mic. This is where I'm confused. See? Good thing I have a note here. Okay.
Jeez. Well, we seem to have really gone into the grease trap of Hamburg history here at the Castle Museum. We spent several blog posts talking about Kewpie burgers and Doyle hamburgers and various types of hamburgers from the area, and people online really seem to like it. But kind of the question is, how do we get into this in the first place there? Well, I do the social media and marketing for the castle. And of course, we get lots of sometimes strange, sometimes interesting research inquiries through Facebook usually. So this happened to be one of them. If you came to the talk with Gary Flynn about his book on Kewpie burgers, he was the one that messaged us and said he had come across a Kewpie burger in Saginaw, and he was curious about its location and some details on it. He couldn't find too much on it. So what did we know? And from there, we kind of got sucked into this whole saga of Kewpie and Doyle and how they all fit together. So that's kind of where it all started from. And we really kind of had fun doing it. It was kind of a silly topic, but we really got into it.
And we definitely could have done what we normally do with the research question is we answered it, hand off the information, and move on with our lives. And that's not what happened. We got curious and kept, mostly because of Tom, finding just one more question. It was very Columbo-esque, just one more thing, and just one more thing. And we couldn't let it go. And so we kept tracking down locations, tracking down advertisements, trying to understand more and more about this whole thing. Now, one of the things is we've said Castle Test Kitchen. How many of you look at our historical recipe posts? Few hands, okay. And some of you are like, what is she talking about? Excellent, I'm gonna tell you. So, for years now, even before Catherine and I started here at the museum, the staff has done like posts about historical recipes. Typically what happens is we find either a recipe or a bit of history and can tie a recipe to it, one way or the other. But we always round out some historical context, and then somebody on the staff volunteers to test the recipe, make it, and see what happens. Sometimes it turns out wonderful and delicious and amazing. Sometimes somebody will grumble for a while about suet. But we have a lot of fun with it. And so I jokingly called us the Castle Test Kitchen, America's Test Kitchen. So I even made us a little logo, but our social media person refuses to actually post our logo. but that's how everything started. And we wanted to know more about Doyle's hamburgs in Saginaw. Like the original question was a broader based look at Kewpie. And we wanted to understand the Saginaw story. And that's why we got curious and kept asking questions. So we're gonna kind of recap some of what we discovered and shared already, but then Tom has some brand new information. Do you wanna get into the Doyle history at all, or do you want to?
Does Tom want to start out with things?
Well, let's bring up the picture, the map. So the original question was for the Kewpie Hotel hamburgs. And everybody understands when we say Kewpie Hotel, we're not talking about a place you can rent a room.
But the census taker was confused. So Doyle's listed as a hotel keeper or something to that effect as his career. The first point they list that, and then they figure it out for the next census that he's actually in restaurants, not hotels.
And really what we discovered about the Kewpie Hotel saga is that it actually was much more complex, and actually goes into Bay County as well, but without Dale Doyle. But there actually were 3 Kewpie Hotel hamburgs in Saginaw. There's the original one, and I don't think we have the photo. We have I found a blurry, no, we need to go back. There is one way out on where what we now know as Veterans Memorial Parkway. There was a very small one right at the kind of juncture there in conjunction with the gas station. I was working on a presentation about the Road Commission and found it in a road magazine for 1930, and it's very blurry. And then we discovered after Dale Doyle leaves the picture, Kewpie Hotels moves to Jefferson.
And that's sort of where we kind of started, was sorting out, like, wait a minute, this was very close to where we are today. And that's maybe some of where the curiosity came in. So Dale Doyle was born in Merrill, raised in Saginaw County. So it's 1923 that he began working in restaurants. So this is where I said that census question comes in. He was listed as a hotel manager in the 1930 census, but he was definitely in food service. So probably the census taker didn't quite know how to list Kewpie Hotel hamburgs.
And at one point, it became evident that Dale Doyle was probably a manager of the Kewpie Burger, and since that's the Doyle connection in. But he kind of got away from that and did his own thing later on. He had quite an interesting life and career beyond hamburgs, even. He was, a state senator at one point for a couple of years in there. He had some other hotel ventures up north and out west, but he always seemed to come back to the scrambled hamburger. So clearly that's where his passion was, for whatever reason. But kind of we went from Kewpie to Doyle, and that was the connection there. I think poor Gary Flynn did not know just everything we'd find out when he asked us that original research question. But we kind of went way above and beyond, as Tom tends to do, but we all got into it. So Dale Doyle took a few years off, and this is about the time that he's state senator. It's the 30s. This is also when the Kewpie burger franchise seems to tank. So there's some question over what happened. You know, did it have to do with the Great Depression? Did it have to do with, in this area, Dale Doyle having other things going on in his life? We're not 100% sure what the reason was, but he seems to reinvent himself with the Doyle Hamburg stand after this.
So the first advertisement that Tom could find, and I say Tom because he is very, very good at finding these things, and so it's for this location, Doyle Hamburg's 80 West Genesee at the foot of the bridge, plenty of parking space. This is from August 7th, 1939. So it's a small structure on the banks of the river. Under his name, that's when that scrambled Hamburg is the key menu item. That's then what he becomes famous for, that loose meat scrambled Hamburg. So I think we actually kind of start to then get into what happens next. So do you want to?
Sure.
Okay.
Before I continue, how many of you are related to the Doyle family? So we have a whole contingent who may know far more than we do.
I'm sure they do.
And so that's wonderful. So we did create our kind of interpretations from what we found online. My mother, when she went to St. Andrews in the 1930s, loved Doyle Hamburg, so she had kind of a knockoff, and we would have them occasionally as a kid, and we have no idea if we came near, and I mean, I think I had them once when I was young, so, I mean, we have no idea how close we came, but we really wanted to really kind of tell the individual stories within the community of both the Doyle hamburgers, but also kind of this development of how the automobile shapes food culture in Saginaw, and also have a good time in the process of doing it. So what we know, and I did not find a really clear photograph of the West Genesee Avenue part, location, but it is really right on the bank of the river at the Genesee Avenue Bridge. And it's, I have my map wrong with north on the top, it's actually correct, but right here it is. The building is gone. The building is gone, and what we know is that it thrived for about 7.5 years. I mean, we know that it's opened by 39, and in 47, Dale Doyle sells it to move into a hotel venture in another city in Michigan. And it's at that time Jules Pockran takes over, and we really don't know whether he continued to serve scrambled hamburgers or not. Anecdotal evidence suggests, at least for a long time, that he did. And actually, that would remain there for until the early 70s, operating as a restaurant. So it is in 1947, in 1950, this is Jack Doyle literally driving back into the restaurant business in Saginaw, and it would be directly across the street behind this part of the property covered by Jacobson's. And I love the title of The Mere Human Foibles. And I wanted to, I'm very interested in the sense of place and what something looked like. And we're really, in this case, unlike the West Genesee Avenue location, in this case, we're really fortunate. We have a series of photographs taken in very late in 54 or 1955 when Jacobson's was acquiring the property next door. So this really captures what the site looked like after Doyle's move into the site, and I'm going to kind of hold up with that part of the story till I get to that part of the lot. So this is what it would have looked like if you were looking right outside the window right now. Catherine, duck a little and people can look out. You can kind of see what it would have looked like. There was Saginaw Medical Supply. There was parking. This is Jefferson Avenue. And there was a Kroger store on the site. And this is the corner of Jefferson and Genesee. So if you would have been looking for the museum, this is exactly what it would have looked like. This is if you're looking at Baum. Kroger's. Now, the interesting part of this property is it has two separate owners. The front portion of it was owned by the McKinley or the Germain family. Look at our piano up in the Made in Saginaw exhibit, the Germain Piano Company. The company owned and I'm directionally horrible, the southeast corner of, well, anyhow, the corner of Jefferson, South Jefferson and Federal. The back part of the property, the area we're looking at now, behind Kroger's. Kroger's was constructed by the Germain family. The other part of the property was owned by the Butterfield Theaters. They had planned on constructing a theater, and then the temple was constructed. They had the property, but they had the lease on the adjoining, on the Franklin, which was only a half block away, which is really part of actually, if we were to go back and go into more detail, would have been even part of the Kewpie Burger part, that little hamburger stand served people by day, but also served people who came downtown for entertainment at night. So if you look carefully, we see the next chapter of Doyle, Hamburgers. Oh, and it goes so quickly that it's blurry, but it's there. It is a small drive-in restaurant, not a drive-through, a drive-in, and a parking lot. That this combination of parking and food together really was an interesting model that was part of the one Doyle had used at Kewpie's. We discovered ads where Doyle was advertising plenty of parking. Remember, this is a very tight urban area, as many of us remember. And so in the middle of the parking lot, they brought in a diner. It was made by the Valentine Diner Company of Wichita, Kansas. And I cannot tell you what model it was. There were 6 or 7 different models. But I will say diner history is could become as interesting as Kewpie history. So we know that the diner was injured or damaged on the way out of Wichita. It hit a railroad, something on the railroad when it was leaving the factory, and so it was delayed a bit. And diner culture, as you might know, is a really hot thing. Nothing could be finer than a Valentine diner, which sounds an awful lot like the Kewpie slogans. And this is from Kansas Heritage of the summer of 2003. And some of you may remember the Valentine Diner. And I don't know that this is the floor plan of the one that was in Saginaw, but there you can see what they look like. They were self-contained. You supplied the foundation. It was brought in by flatbed truck. They were designed so they could go down the highway, and that's exactly what we had. And for those of you who want to explore diner culture further, there is a Facebook group I have not joined. And so this is an ad for the Doyle's Drive-In. And once again, it's not a drive-through, it's a drive-in at Federal and Baum. And it has Dale Doyle and John R. Doyle, his son, operating it. You can now get the best Hamburg made 24 hours a day, open continuously, Sunday from 6 p.m. until the following Sunday at 4 a.m. Try our breakfast special, which became part of their growing thing. 2 country fresh eggs, toast, and coffee for 45 cents.
I mean, just pause a second to think about how modern that concept really is. Like being a fast food place that's open basically 24/7, and then, you know, right now you have the newer breakfast wars among the big fast food chains at the moment. Like, are we going to have breakfast? Or are we not going to have breakfast? So it's actually kind of fascinating when you realize that they were way ahead of that game.
They really were on the cutting edge of it. And it's also interesting to think of, this is fast food though, when it didn't come pre-prepared, that it really had to be prepared on demand. So it's a really different work environment, as we discovered in the test kitchen. And so I just, you know, this sense of place, and I'm giving a walking tour tomorrow, so I'm making certain I have this sense of place ingrained. But I love these arrows you can drop on. So it's the back part of Jacobson's. For those of us who remember Jacobson's in the 1960s, before it became a superstore, or even before the budget part was added on in the South Side, what happened is the McKinley family developed the front part and leased to Jacobson the front part. We don't know what the year is, but that's the part that the museum owns. Prior to even ground being broken, the Jacobson's chain, which was used to owning and building their own buildings, purchased the lot from Butterfield behind the Jacobson store. And so in effect, we always say they added an addition. I don't know why I'm doing air quotes today. But they added an addition to to a building they haven't even started to construct. So if you walked into the front door of Jacobson's, of course, this is what we would have been greeted with in 1955. And all of these, we have a tour of Jacobson's in 1955 on our website. And if you haven't done it, which it seems from the visitation, we have a lot of people who have, in the back, this is the part where something has been displaced. This is roughly the same view we just saw with the Doyle's Hamburg stand and parking lot just a year later, and that's what it looked like inside. It's so rare that we have inside and outside photos, I couldn't resist padding it a little. But parking was still, and car culture was still very much and adapting to the automobile was very much part of downtown. With the grand opening of Jacobson's, that may have meant that Doyle's Hamburg was no longer on Federal and Baum, but that didn't mean they were gone. And thank you, Mr. Doyle, for making me aware of what happened, because I thought from the newspaper account that they had constructed an entirely new building and the diner had been trucked off to some other city. What happened was a diner that's been moved once can be moved again. So the drive, minus one end now, but the drive-in was now at 135 North Jefferson at Tuscola. And so this is the only photo I have of it, but it shows the drive-in, the original Valentine Diner enlarged, and you have a question.
Is that by the fire station?
No, it's further.
That's the one I remember. It's over by the.
Yeah, that's another one. You have to wait a moment. So your order's coming, Sylvia. And it is, and I think I'm getting to the right one because stuff moves around a little. New decade, 1954. So that original location, I mean, it really changed rapidly. Yes.
I remember going both of them, both the bridges, but they had both locations.
Now the bridge one, no. So the bridge one becomes the Doyle Hamburgs at West Genesee, 80 West Genesee, is no longer, the name, they didn't, Jules Cochran purchases it in 1947, and it is, although it keeps the Doyle name, it is not part of the Doyle operations. Am I correct with that? That it's just kind of a floating entity unto itself. We don't have menus.
Yeah, we had a little bit of like, that was a confusing part of the research. But then,
and we've checked and so it remains open and operating, and many people fondly think of it as a part of it, but it's a different owner even though it has the same name. And we don't know a lot about the menu, but anecdotal stories suggest that for quite a long time they considered to serve a Doyle-like hamburger.
I have an aunt who actually worked at a restaurant. I know it's Doyle, maybe like 1954, 5.
So on the West Genesee one?
No,
That's just one Genesee. The 80 West Genesee is at the bridge, Genesee Bridge. And it literally was at the bridge.
also I remember the one on Jefferson and White. Late, like midnight.
Yeah. So then this is where we move on to the next level, which is 509 Lapeer. And I think that's the one you recall. And I have one photo of it. You can see it in this photo, the Doyle sign. That's not the one you remember? Then it's not we don't have.
It's more like the diner, in fact, what I remember is more like the diner shaped one
Yeah, so the exact.
on the side street of the fire station.
So that is not, so that's an unaccounted for one. I will say what we found, there are just tons of small restaurants that are operating. And so the one on Lapeer remains open until the mid-70s. However, in 1967, there were two operating downtown, plus the one that still carried the name that's not part of the one that we're not talking about anymore, but the pre-1947. So we have 114 South Washington, 509 Lapeer, and 234 North Center. This is 1967. From the Saginaw News clipping file, so it has the date, so it is January 8th, 1967. And you'll be glad you come pay us a visit. You'll be glad you did. And this is from 66, when the one on Washington Avenue has opened. And this is an ad. What can Doyle do to improve the quality of 3 generations? Here's Dale Doyle in 27, Jack Doyle in 1939, and Tom Doyle, who started in 1960. And it describes with some accuracy, with a great
We're
deal
all
of
waving because
accuracy,
he's here.
the whole story that we spend a long time researching. And it describes in great detail the interior of the one on South Washington. And the one on South Washington, would remain open until, I'm going to need to use my notes with this.
August 1970. It's acquired by Texas International Restaurants.
And the one at 234 North Center remains open until January of 1984, when it was purchased by the Legalo family and became a Tony's. So that is just kind of a recounting of what we found. We could add more detail, but we won't.
So, so this is one of the images from one of the attempts. Those of you who followed this a recipe saga, I think we did 1 Kewpie style burger and 3 Doyle style burgers. We were told every single time we were not even close to getting the recipe right. We're also told it's under lock and key. I don't know if the Doyles back there want to have a word about that. But I don't know. Does anyone? I was not. You made one?
I think I made a scrambled one. Yeah, I made one of the scrambled ones. The problem was everything just says, scrambled hamburg, which could be like a loose meat sandwich. It could be drier than that. Tom, what was that phrase?
Leaving only flavor and protein.
There you go. So it kind of left a lot up in the air, and then we kind of finally determined, like, maybe it has more to do with the preparation than necessarily the ingredients. And Tom had some different theories on the preparation and frying it and making sure every bit was crisped up. But you might say, well, what's with the scrambled hamburger? I mean, well, when we were doing our research, and a Kewpie burger is just burger with certain toppings, but Kewpies were allowed to have localized menu items. It wasn't like a fast food franchise today, like McDonald's, where any McDonald's you go to, you got the same things, right? Within reason. They were allowed to have different variations depending on where they were at. So kind of the theory is, perhaps the Kewpie here that Dale Doyle was probably the manager of had a scrambled burger. He came up with this idea, and once Kewpie's closed and he created Doyle Hamburgers, he kept that scrambled burger because it was popular, or that was kind of his thing. He also had something about Mexican chili, I think, was a popular Saginaw menu item up here. So there were a few different variations like that. But we certainly tried our hand at scrambled hamburgers, olive burgers, Kewpie burgers, all of the above.
We were so dedicated, we even took a road trip to try to find the last, at least, Kewpies still here, which the Kewpie in Lansing has a scrambled hamburger. So we had to go eat that. I don't know if there's any connection with Grandma Weston and the Doyle family, but if not, you might want to have a chat, because it seemed to be the closest to like a delicious scrambled burger we had, more so than ours. Yeah, I did either of you have a favorite attempt?
My middle version, I think I did two, I can't remember if I did 2 or 3 versions, but one I did just based on what my mother would make, which simply was lightly, it did have onions in, and that was something that we debated, but a little bit of onion, and part of it was using a very hot pan and cooking it very quickly, but not overcooking it, so that it was just, where a professional grill, I mean, my mother would use an electric frying pan for it, and using a small quantity of meat and cooking it rapidly, very hot, moving it constantly. And then we did find some online versions that claimed to be influence that sounded more like a sloppy Joe. I did add a little, on the last version, I did add some Worcestershire sauce and just a little, and that was good. But I mean, it's been so many years, I have no idea if I came anywhere near close. But it did make actually, if I had time, I'd cook it for lunch today. One of the things we were told, Patty Evans, who's a friend of mine who worked downtown, and she remembered she would very often go to the one on Lapeer. And one of the things she said, for condiments, ketchup, mustard, and pickle were offered, but mustard was her favorite, or all of her friends' favorite condiment, which was really good, although I do like a touch of ketchup on mine, as you can see. The one I had with just mustard, I wrapped in a piece of parchment, so it was a takeout.
Tom told me to grab one photo from like the blog post, and clearly I picked not his favorite.
You picked the perfect one. That was my favorite one. And it is a recipe where the ingredients become paramount. What you choose paramount to how it turns out. The choice of a bun is incredible. There's a local sandwich shop that I loved, and with the closing of Hamilton Bakery, they had to change their buns, and it's just an incredible difference. The quality of the meat, how much, and not overcooking it. And it's something you don't want held. So I think that's part of the secret, but there probably were other secrets.
Oh, I'm sure.
And no, there were. But I mean, we at least kind of had a discussion about it and really tried to really rediscover that sense of place, the whole thing, without going too deeply into diner culture.
Well, So one of the interesting things about this series in particular, but many of our historical recipe posts, is the memories it evokes. You know, clearly people in this community were deeply connected and impacted by Doyle Hamburg restaurants, whichever one you went to. And we heard a lot of feedback, and it's fun when people are like, well, I remember, and they have their own personal history. So it, and in a second, I'm going to ask them a question about like broader history, but I love that food brings us back to the personal as well. Like it connects us to our families, like Tom's mom's story and beyond. And everybody has these things. We got lots of stories about, you know, going with friends after school or things like that. And like I mean, that's just fun. And it's fun to be able to evoke that for people. But I was going to ask both Tom and Catherine to think about like what do we learn? Like we have a lot of fun looking at history through the lens of food, but it can be bigger than that. Like what do you think we get out of using food as a lens for studying history?
You know, Catherine, you go first, please.
Okay.
We didn't rehearse.
I mean, I think one of the things that, as Jen mentioned, becomes so important is when people have memories of a place, suddenly that place isn't just some crummy diner in the, you know, soon-to-be Jacobson's parking lot. That's really a place of memories. It's a place where people spent time, and it really changes the significance of that place, right? Was it about the food? Maybe a little bit. It's probably more about the time that people spent together there and what they remember about downtown Saginaw and maybe going there after school or the memories they made with friends there. And it makes it more important, I think. Otherwise, a building's just a building without the people in it and the places that were there. So I think that's one kind of connection.
No, I fully agree with that, and actually still some of the things I was going to say, not really. But no, but one of the things too is really the structure of a community you learn about. And I mean, this really, the CUPE question, and then when we moved into Doyle, it didn't really sink in when you look at a Sanborn map, which are the fire maps that I have some photos, just how in the early 20th century these small restaurants fit into a community and really help to shape a community. And sometimes when we're looking at individual recipes from individuals, we even get a sense of the way their homes work. Sometimes we get recipes from where somebody just assumes you know how to cook, and you realize they really knew how to cook. But sometimes we get recipes where we know that the family had a staff, and they just simply knew how to tell the staff how to do it. But sometimes people who can really cook well just assume other people can cook. So that we really learned really about kind of the social layers in a home, how things manage. But I think it's really that connection with kind of that sense of place and what really brings it alive. And that's sometimes what we lack when we go into a historic house museum. We could bring back, you know, we could have an exhibit of that diner, but it's really not the same thing. If you just look at the diner, it's really going up to it, when the car is being parked, going up. And even that scent of grease, I know I'm working right now on reinstalling Meyer Brothers Jewelry Store. And one of the things I really want to do is a soundtrack, because they had a chime clock.
I thought he was going to say he wanted to include the scent of grease somewhere in an exhibit.
But really, that's very much part of it. I mean, we're not going to do that. But I mean, you would have been able to smell, I mean, those small restaurants that was in the same block, actually.
Well, there's something to be said about, you know, simple food that was so popular and so well loved. I mean, we make lots of very fancy dishes too in the Castle Test Kitchen. But the hamburger, who doesn't love a hamburger, right? And lots of people have great memories over any of these hamburgers.
And it was a real mistake before eating.
Yeah, I think I agree with all of that. And I think that it also, you know, you mentioned talking about car culture as being tied into some of like the drive-ins and things. And I think when we have these other ways to look at it. You know, there are plenty of histories about cars and car cultures and even diners, but I think when you start combining things together and really recognizing how people lived their lives, how they went through the world, in many ways not so different than us, and that can kind of help deepen our understanding and think about people as not somebody from the past, this way distant person that we can't understand. Like we can understand, we can share, you know, a lot of things with them in different ways, and food is one of those ways, but it kind of opens that door to recognizing how much you can learn and understand about the world, how it was, and maybe a little bit about then how we got here to where we are today too. I think we're ready for audience questions. Yes.
I'm not quite. Oh. Yes, there are. You did more of that research than I did, Catherine. I'm going to put you on the spot.
Well, I mean, I know the Doyles married into, I think, a confectionery business originally, and they kind of had some food business connections. But then obviously Dale Doyle was interested in politics and hotels and everything else, which would be kind of interesting to know, like, why so many interests? Like, where do those all come from? And, you know, today we don't think of somebody working in, you know, quote unquote fast food places necessarily being a career. But certainly this is a very different time, right? And if you were the manager of a place like this, if this was kind of your thing, this very well could have been your career, you know, and the whole family obviously gets involved. I know I had found one article, I think, about the wife even working at one of them one night when an incident happened or something. It was a police report. But so it's not like today where you might think of people having these bigger goals or higher aspirations necessarily. And it makes you wonder, like, you know, he was senator, why did he come back to the food industry? Why did he come back to the hotel industry? So I think, you know, people did all sorts of different things. And I was going to mention earlier, but this is kind of like a little snapshot of food history locally. But when you think about it, like, it really fits into this bigger sort of fast food industry, right? We're seeing this point in time where there aren't McDonald's, there aren't these chains, right? This is before all that, really. And certainly Doyle kind of hangs over into the 80s and the fast food era there. But it's before all that. And it's when these little local places made sense. Whereas today, I mean, there's McDonald's on every couple of corners. But certainly people don't have the same memories at a McDonald's that they probably did at Doyle Hamburgers, you know.
I mean, in fairness, I did one time get stuck inside the Hamburglar playground thing at our McDonald's, so I definitely have a deep memory of that McDonald's. Does anybody remember the Hamburglar and the like playground equipment? Oh yeah. Jeff knows. Yes. Make sure everybody can hear you.
Are you going to hold this against me? It was very, there's a lot of things that I didn't know about. Louder? How's that? I was born quite a bit after 1927, so there's some things that happened between 27 and my birth date that I had no idea about. My older sister, Kathy, may be able to help us on that. But let me tell you a little bit about Dale Doyle. He was a pretty straightforward fella, and he hired a lot of the help from St. Andrews. And back then, the Catholics could not eat meat on Friday. So people would come in on Friday evening, or students would come in on Friday evening, and they'd order a hamburger, and the waitress, which was a graduate of St. Andrews, would tell them, you have to wait till midnight. And he, the waitress in the back room, he'd say, now listen, if they order a hamburger, you give them a hamburger. I'm running a restaurant, not a church. That was Dale, and he did have a hotel in Wilcox, Arizona. My mother and dad, my sister and I were out there for 2 or 3 years. And he had a hotel in Conway, Michigan, which was just north of Petoskey. And I don't know how long they owned that, till the early 1950s, I believe. Other than that, I really appreciate you putting this program on, and I appreciate the information you've given us. I still make the hamburgers, but I think that's as far as I can go. Yes.
I have a question for you.
Okay.
Could you make a scrambled hamburger today? Yeah.
He does.
Or make one back then? Could you do it today?
Could I? Yes. Yeah. We bought griddles for we live in Harbor Springs, and we have a griddle up there and a griddle out there in Arizona. So when we have old-time customers that may stop by, we invite them over and make hamburgers for them. So if any of you are in Harbor Springs or Scottsdale, Arizona, give us a call. No, there's nothing really fancy about it, but it was good meat, Heinz ketchup, Spanish onions, and mustard. Yeah, we thin the mustard a little, so you could put it on the hamburger much more easily. You could have as much as you wanted. I don't know what else to tell you. What's that?
What was the deluxe?
Oh, yeah. You could get mustard, ketchup, pickle, and onion, or deluxe. That would be tomatoes, mayonnaise, lettuce, and an olive. I think that's all I have. Unless anybody's got any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
I think it would be a big mistake not to mention Emma Doyle, who was the heart of that place and worked forever. And she should have been in that line of men. She would be today. But she had her own place in Bay City for a while. But she worked very hard, and she needs to be recognized. God rest her soul. Emma, Tom's mom. Yeah. So it'd be Jack's wife, yeah, but she was a wonderful lady. She needs to be recognized.
Thank you for sharing that.
I do agree. The women need their recognition, so I'm really glad you said that, and we will do what we can to. Yeah. Did anybody else have a comment? No? Rainbow. Schaefer's. Yeah. Yeah. Quality ingredients. Yeah. Okay. Any other audience questions or comments? Well, our work here is done then. Okay. Well, I do want to remind everybody that they won't all be Doyle hamburgers, but we do historical recipes each Sunday. Those are on our website, which is castlemuseum.org, and we thank you. We also share those links out on social media as a reminder as well. And if you want to find these recipes, honestly, the easiest way to pull them up is if you just Google Castle Museum and Doyle Hamburgs. You'll get the whole list of all of the different attempts we made, and so you can. Google doesn't always pull them up in order, so you might have to like think about that a little, look for the date. But you can still read all of these recipes if you missed it the first go.
I'm just going to add one other thing about the history of the Castle Test Kitchen recipes, that it really, back in the earlier part of this century, that makes it sound like we're so far away, doesn't it? Jean Beach and Pat Scheck had published a Saginaw cookbook, and it was very, very popular. We sold out of two printings, and during the pandemic, the museum made a decision to keep our entire staff engaged, even though we couldn't work on site, that employed and engaged. And Deanna from our staff volunteered to do, we decided to do a series of Facebook posts, which has turned out to be a tremendously popular but also exhausting, but volunteered to do recipes for the cookbook, from the cookbook, and then we would do histories and photographs to go with it. And it really has been a team effort, and we've only duplicated ourselves accidentally once or twice, but we've pretty much moved beyond the Saginaw cookbook that Jean and Pat did, and have moved out into all types of other sources. And sometimes we do, we find another historic, an old cookbook that we get a recipe from, grumble about the fact it doesn't have any temperatures like the one I'm doing for next week, or cooking times. But sometimes we find a subject, because this is really a story less about what we cook and take a photograph of, but that is a pretty good photograph. But it's really more about the story. And you know, these are stories just like the story of Emma Doyle. We didn't pick up on that. They are stories that would be lost if we didn't connect with them. And the further we go, I remembered, I was thinking of something, I wanted to do something on Jacobson's before the holidays. And I remembered I used to, when I worked here in the 80s, I'd always go over to Jacobson's at lunchtime, and I'd go to Le Buffet, and I would get a couple of different salads, and I loved the 7-layer salad. So I did a knockoff of their 7-layer salad recipe, and I made it very clear this isn't the Jacobson 7-layer salad recipe. And what are the true 7 layers in a 7-layer salad?
There was a lot of debate around here about that.
That is a great, if you're at a dinner and you don't know what to talk about, and people are of a certain age, you can just say, do you know the real 7 layers of a 7-layer salad? But it turned out to be immensely popular, with somebody pointed out that we had too much mayonnaise in it. But if you have ideas, let us know. We've done the Strand. We did, Jean and Pat had found the recipe for the short ribs at Roy's Steakhouse. A friend of mine had worked at the Royal Palm, and so we did cheese dreams. And then as I was broiling it, I realized they had a bacon fire as one of the fires in the building. So we quickly watched the bacon as we were broiling it. But it really is a way to really connect stories, and it's really a team effort. And if you have ideas, let us know. Or if you have photographs, let us know.
Yeah, I wanted to mention, if you are a social media person and you're on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, definitely comment, because I like to lurk around those comments and see what people mention, or if they say like, oh, well, I didn't eat that there, but I remember eating this when I was a kid and would go there, or whatever. And sometimes that leads to us looking for more recipes too. I know even with the Doyle hamburgers, try to find the real one. I reached out to Art Lewis, listen to the missus. They don't have the real one either, just so you know. Don't bother looking for it.
Okay, so I think that kind of wraps us up today, and I do just want a special thank you to Tom Doyle and family for coming. That's really special for us that you would come all this way to hear us talk about your family's history, and we really, really appreciate you. And we appreciate the rest of you for joining us today, and we hope to see you at a program soon. Thanks.